My name is David Vance. This research was kind of done partly for my master's thesis at Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. Today I'm going to be discussing how I developed a solar and energy storage sizing methodology for off-grid transactive microgrids. You can think of a transactive microgrid as a collection of otherwise standalone solar and energy storage systems that come together with a trading system in order to increase their reliability. This presentation will proceed from an introduction to the standalone PV systems, how to collect them together into microgrids, and then how to size them. And then I'm going to do some model development, and I have some initial results. I have a journal article that's coming that will include more comprehensive results and then some conclusions. So this is your normal standalone photovoltaic system. The main components are the solar panels and the battery bank, which are used to fulfill load requirements. This is sometimes referred to as an isolated self-consumption strategy because there's no grid available. So there's no way to sell your excess power, and there's no backup power available. Sometimes this makes sense in like isolated or rural areas where it's difficult and expensive to extend power lines. According to a survey by the Home Power magazine in 2006, there are at least 180,000 U.S. households that operate without any public utility service. Major reasons being given for going off-grid in that survey were wanting independence from their local utility and also a focus on green living. So a transactive microgrid would allow these standalone systems to freely and automatically exchange their power to overcome issues with reliability and excess generation. This is made possible by blockchain. Some of you might be familiar with it. There was a good presentation yesterday on it. But blockchain is a decentralized, distributed, and public digital ledger which is used to record transactions across many computers so that the record cannot be altered. You can kind of think of it as a really sophisticated bookkeeping system which automatically checks itself. So there has been some existing research done on these type of transactive microgrids, mainly by electrical engineers and economists. One research in particular showed that if you have a microgrid that's attached to the grid and it happens to get disconnected for either a day or a week, that allowing them to trade amongst themselves increases their reliability and decreases the amount of total storage required to ensure that nobody goes without power. So this research is going to actually investigate year-round off-grid operation using either a centralized or interconnected sharing strategy. In the centralized energy sharing strategy, all of the solar panels and energy storage are centrally stored to create a collective battery and solar system. The blockchain technology would be responsible for ensuring that each system pays their part and is so that you would have like a section of the battery that would be yours. This strategy is expected to be more cost-effective and reliable just because of the advantage of taking advantage of the scale and its simplicity. In my model, what I did was I just added all of the loads together and then didn't consider the energy trades in this model. There are issues that have been brought up concerning equity, policy, and interconnection, and that's outside of the scope of this research. In the interconnected energy sharing case, each house has its own energy storage and solar panels, and they're able to sell energy when their battery is at capacity and buy energy when their battery is depleted. In the proposed model, I allow a buy to occur if there's an empty battery while at least one other system has more than 5% charge. This is to prevent, you wouldn't want to sell someone energy if you only have like a 2% battery yourself. And then a sell will occur anytime one system has a full battery while another system can take the leftover energy. So what I've done within my model is I've made some flags and an output table which shows where the trades are occurring and the total number of trades. So in the future, this would be used to show what kind of trading behavior you would expect. So normally, you would be buying more energy during the winter when the power generation is low, and you would be selling more energy during the summer. The specific objectives of this research was to develop a MATLAB program which directly compares the 3 operating strategies, and then determine how effectively the energy sharing strategies improve initial cost. The research variables I considered were the operating strategy, the initial battery charge, the starting month. Horizontal load variation would be shifting the load forward or backwards an hour. It doesn't really make sense to trade if you have the exact same load profile. Also, the number of systems, the geographic location, and the required reliability. Not considered in my model are the temperature effects on the solar and battery, the charge and discharge rate of the battery, extreme weather behavior. I just use what's called a typical meteorological year data, so that kind of takes an average and doesn't really include the extreme weather. And then the vertical load variation, my model does do vertical load variation, but when I tried to do results with that, the results were all over the place. I couldn't really get them to converge. So I'm looking at improving the vertical load variation. So when optimally sized, it's a techno-economic optimization problem. So usually, because you're off-grid, you're gonna try to ensure a certain amount of reliability at the lowest possible cost. There's several different methodologies that you can use. I'll go more into that. And then this figure kind of shows what the results typically look like. So for a certain number of solar panels, say 9, there's going to be a certain amount of energy storage that is required to meet that load, and there will be a price associated with that. And you'll step to the next solar panel and find out how much energy storage you need until you get to optimized value, and then increasing the number of solar panels past that point increases the cost. So this kind of shows how important it is to size your system correctly from the beginning. A lot of times, people who go off-grid by themselves don't do the analysis right, and they try to say, like, oh, I need more solar power because I'm out of, my battery ran out of power last week. The technical criteria I chose was loss of power supply probability. I took it as the ratio of the number of hours of outage to the total number of hours in the time period. It can also be taken as the ratio of the amount of capacity not supplied due to outage to the total amount of capacity that was demanded. This is a widely used method for sizing standalone systems and has a standard value of 0.1%. With a 1 hour time resolution and 8,760 hours in a year, this would mean 9 hours of time. 9 hours would be acceptable for outage in a year. So there's the equation. And just to be clear, a value of 1 would mean that the supply never meets the load demand, and a value of 0 would mean that the load demand is always satisfied. The economic criteria I used was just the initial capital cost, taken as the combined cost of the solar panels, batteries, their installation, and hardware, and the cost of their interconnection. Estimating the interconnection cost was a really difficult part of my research that I really didn't come up with a satisfactory answer for. I talked to several electrical engineer professors, and the best estimate we could come up with was houses being 50 feet apart and $1 a foot and $150 for installation, so $200 per house. But after the presentation yesterday, I realized that doesn't consider the cost of the computer power, and there's also probably a controller that needs to be added. So I don't think it'll be way more expensive than $200, but I think that's a pretty good estimate. These are the typical sizing methodologies that are used in sizing standalone systems. I chose the numerical methodology just because it was the easiest to add the energy trading functionality to it. The intuitive is just a guess. It's not really useful for this type of research. The analytical didn't really lend itself to looking at more than one system at a time. There is no existing software that I found that allows for energy trading and looking at more than one system at a time. And the artificial intelligence was unnecessary because there is meteorological data readily available in the United States. This gives a general overview of my code and the steps that it goes through. This is a little busy on this side, but I just wanted to show the major steps so that you specify the project, and then from that it simulates the solar load data, calculates the PV output, simulates the load data, and then it uses that PV and load data for each hour to calculate how much storage is in your battery, and then it sees if there's any hours where you don't meet your load, and then writes to Excel. The final output of the software is an Excel table giving the optimum configuration for each trial. It breaks down the component costs. It tells you the percent of the PV that was utilized and how much excess generation was wasted. It also details the number of trades performed and the average cost per system. There are detailed flowcharts available for all of these functions if you're interested. This is the input data that's required. I think that most of this is self-explanatory. Besides, the initial hour is used to specify the starting month, and there's a guide to that in my code. It's like a value of 1 would mean January 1st at 1 a.m. Also, the number of years of simulation can be taken. It doesn't have to be a whole year. You can do a couple hours of simulation or days, which is useful. And I'm going to talk more about the PV derating factor, but it's used to account for the losses in the system. I'm not going to talk too much about how the solar data is simulated. There's flowcharts if you're interested, but it's done using a Markov model. So you input solar data, and then from that historical solar data, it takes a tally and creates a transition matrix detailing. If you know the current hour, it tells you what is the probability that you go to other solar radiation values, and it goes through the whole year. This is the equation I use for calculating PV output is this simple equation. It's just equal to the power output under standard conditions, which is your rated PV of the solar panel, times the PV derating factor, which in this case includes the effective clearness index and temperature. There are more detailed equations which you would have to simulate the temperature through the year and the clearness index through the year. And so this made it quite a bit simpler doing that. And then that times the simulated solar data divided by the incident radiation at standard conditions. The simulated load profile is currently taken straight from the input data. Variability is just introduced by horizontally shifting the load profile or by inputting different load data for each system. So like I said, when I tried to randomly shift the data up and down, it made the results go kind of crazy. So what I'm looking at is shifting the 24-hour time period up and down. I think that's a better way of doing it. So to validate the baseline, I used energy software called Homer, Hybrid Optimization of Multiple Energy Resources. It performs a similar analysis to the proposed model, and it's highly regarded. So it's set up to have the same specifications and imported solar load data. And I found that it compared pretty reasonably. Even the yellow ones, they're just off by like one solar panel. So this was only able to be used to validate the baseline because Homer cannot do the analysis of trading. Here's some initial results that I have. So when I varied the effective initial charge, I found that for July, there's really no difference. But for November, if you have a really low initial charge, your price will go up. So that's just because of there's not a lot of solar generation available to bounce back from that low initial charge condition. Based on this results, I used a 10% initial charge for the rest of the simulation. And then looking at the effective starting month for Indianapolis, I thought that this would show up a little bit better, but the ones that don't stay with the rest of the curve are November, December, and January. So that also goes with starting in a winter month will give you higher costs. And so I actually found that software doesn't let you choose the starting month. So if you're going to go off grid in the winter, it might make sense to do some extra calculations and make sure that you're not going to have a problem with your low initial charge. Based on these results, I chose June as the starting month for the rest of my simulation. And then this gives an idea of what the effect of varying the number of systems. So the top curve is basically all of the interconnected cases. They kind of converge together no matter how many systems were in the grid. And the centralized case kind of stuck together no matter how many systems in the grid. I think this is due to the load simulation, but I think it is promising that the centralized case is cheaper. And then I looked at varying the required reliability, and I found that it lowers predictably, as you would expect. And so I have a lot more of these figures, and they look about the same. So in conclusion, I developed a MATLAB program for comparing these 3 operating strategies. The initial results showed about a 7 to 10% cost reduction for the centralized case, even with only 2 systems. And the interconnected case showed a consistent cost reduction with the interconnection cost. It was very small, though, less than 1%. So there were energy trades occurring, and it was beneficial, but it didn't provide a whole lot of benefit. I'm generating results, investigating the effective initial charge, starting month, load variability, number of systems, required reliability, and geographic location. And like I said, that'll be included in a journal article that I'm currently writing. Future work underway is improving the load simulation, developing new energy sharing strategies where we try to increase the equity and make sure that there's not one system that's providing all of the benefit for everyone else. I'm also adding wind energy generation. I think it would be interesting to see, because usually wind energy is way too expensive for residential applications, but if you can get to maybe 10 or 20 systems together, maybe it might be worthwhile to add wind to a residential system. I'm also doing more in-depth investigation of the physical interconnection, trying to determine what exactly needs to be done to interconnect houses. I'm also creating a graphic user interface. I found that this is really expensive, and it's hard to go off grid, basically.
Thank you very much. Maybe 1 or 2 brief questions?
I like the idea of thinking about with a wind turbine in there as well, and I wonder if maybe even some others, like maybe one household has a engine that burns ethanol as kind of a backup, so shared backup. And if you were sort of mimicking a national scale system, but at a neighborhood level, whether you wouldn't come up with better cost figures.
Yeah, Homer has a lot of that available, and so I would like also to see those other technologies and how they would allow for energy trading.
Go ahead.
Okay, just a brief question. As far as I understood, it's equal sharing. Is it also possible in this model to implement, let's say, different willingnesses to, let's say, pay or among the different participants, mainly during, let's say, scarcity situations?
So that's been some of the research that the economists have been doing. They've been looking at how to maximize equity, how to create pricing that gives you the incentive to trade. And I tried to avoid that question in mine. I just tried to look at the technical.
Okay, but in general, it would be possible to implement it in the existing model.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And the code is available at